thank you all for joining. Really excited to do this webinar with Evan. I'm Grant Miller. I'm the founder and CEO of Replicated. We're here at the Replicated HQ in Culver City. So Evan came in. He just lives on the street, and he's an engineer at HashiCorp. I'll let him talk a little bit about his role there.
Yeah. Thanks, Grant. My name is Evan Phoenix. I'm an engineer at HashiCorp. I've been there for over 3 years now. So seen that company grow and been working on Terraform Enterprise, specifically the on-premises version for 2.5 years or so. So it's a project that I started working on pretty soon after I started. So
awesome, cool. Well, let's dive right in. So just as a quick overview, we'll talk a little bit about Replicated first, just from a high level, and then we'll dive into some more of the things around Terraform and how Evan and the HashiCorp team are using Replicated to distribute Terraform Enterprise. Cool. So first, just a quick overview of a few of Replicated's customers. We work with some of the best developer tools, ops tools, AI tools, security tools in the world to help them package up and distribute a private instance of their cloud native application to their largest enterprise customers. So this is just a few of the applications that use Replicated today. We've been doing this for about 4.5 years. And throughout that time, we've really learned a lot about what it takes to distribute and sort of maintain modern on-prem software. So oftentimes we talk about this new concept that we call modern on-prem, which basically means taking a cloud native application, so something that's sort of designed to be automated and orchestrated and scheduled. So think about maybe it's a Kubernetes based application that has lots of manifests, and how do you distribute those to enterprise customers so they can run a private instance of your application? The whole vision of Replicated is that sort of now we have these interesting patterns and primitives of reliability, which makes software a lot easier to operate and maintain. And we kind of are sharing these as a community, and I think a lot of really is happening in the Kubernetes world. We'll talk about more of that later. But with these new patterns and primitives, what we think is that you can take an application and you can distribute it to your largest enterprise customers. They can run those manifests, and they can have your entire application up and running privately without ever having to share the data that we put into that application with you as the vendor. So, we think this is sort of blurring the lines between traditional on-prem software that was very operationally intensive, and SaaS software, which was low operational intensity, but required that you share the data with the vendor. So we launched Replicated about 4.5 years ago to sort of bring this vision to the market. And we've been really lucky to work with a bunch of incredible customers along the way who've given us feedback on how should we approach this problem. And as a result, we have about 45 of the Fortune 100 that are actually running applications in their infrastructure powered by Replicated. And there's another 1,200 companies that already run Replicated applications in their infrastructure as well. So that's everything from healthcare and financial services to different technology verticals. One of the things that I always find interesting is the way that people generally think about traditional on-prem software. They think that only the largest banks or maybe government agencies would want to run software, quote unquote, on-prem. But we don't find this the case. We actually see that many very modern organizations, think about some of the largest technology companies in the world, some of the most innovative technology companies in the world as well, are using tools like Replicated to run private instances of their applications, sometimes even just in an Amazon VPC. As a matter of fact, about half of the installs of Replicated applications go into a VPC in a cloud provider. So the difference there is it's the enterprise's account that they're installing into versus the account that belongs to the vendor. But as this is sort of a new way to think about enterprise software, where you're distributing this to your customer, and as a result, it creates a lot of interesting and sort of different challenges in distributing your software. So if you're doing a multi-tenant SaaS application, you're going to have access to the servers, you're going to have access to the logs, you're going to have access to really everything. In a world where you're distributing your application as a cloud native manifests, you need to figure out ways to manage that build pipeline so that it's not a forked version of your SaaS environment. You need to manage your different releases and sort of which customers get which release. You need to figure out how to do custom licensing and entitlements for these different customers so they can have different versions of your application running. And then you need to really think about supportability. And so how do you support one of these customers in a disconnected world? Obviously we say software has gotten more reliable, but it's not perfect yet. So what can we do to enable that to happen? So what we're going to do is spend a little time with Evan to talk about, first learn a little bit about Terraform, and then talk about how they're using Replicated, talk about what they were doing before, and then kind of just dive into some of the things they've built around, our tool and some of the automation that they have, and then Dex, who's on the line as well, will probably ask a few questions. So he's kind of our secondary, co-host here. And he's going to pop in with a few questions from time to time, but hopefully we learn a lot from Evan. So let's dive in here. So you want to just talk quickly about HashiCorp and what Terraform is?
Yeah, sure. So Terraform is a tool that folks use to basically automate, and primarily it gets used for automating infrastructure, although it can automate almost anything. The sort of the bigger claim to fame is it has all of the functionality that you would need in order to automate the configuration and setup of things, not just within one cloud, but across many clouds. One of the first examples that one of the founders, Mitchell Hashimoto, showed with Terraform was like setting up a DigitalOcean droplet and then setting up a DNS record for it and being able to spread that across. And it has all of the functionality for you to just sort of declare what you want to do, and it figures out the order to do that. How should it plumb everything through? And that was when it first started 5-6 years ago. Now it has support for basically all the clouds, tons of on-premises software. The list goes on and on and on of providers that it has, and it is it's funny. It's one of those tools that you would think like, oh well, can't the cloud vendors do this better than HashiCorp could do it as a sort of external vendor? One of the interesting things that we find is that Terraform regularly adds support for features before CloudFormation does.
Oh, funny.
Yeah, it happens all the time, and people will be like, well, I use Terraform because CloudFormation stuff lags by months, and it shows up on day 0 for Terraform pretty often. So so that's the sort of the broader view of what Terraform is. You can kind of get into Terraform Enterprise.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So Terraform Enterprise is a service that HashiCorp specifically builds and provides. And what it does is it adds collaboration features on top of the core Terraform workflows. So so you manage your Terraform, you check it into a VCS via GitHub or Bitbucket or whatever, and then it will automatically do things like it will speculate and basically run plans on like pull requests and things like that to say like, hey, here's what this would do if you went ahead and did it, and it does work or it doesn't work. And then you can have things like you can have role-based permissions, so you can do things like one team can propose changes, but they can't be the ones to actually apply them. So you can have this is a really common model where you have folks be able to say like, hey, I need a new server. They'll write the PR for the server. They can actually even merge that PR for the server, but then they have to get someone from, say, the IT team to actually go in and click the apply button or do the actual application of it to to say like, yeah, that was all good, but now I'm going to go ahead and improve that thing. So it continues to grow. It has all kinds of governance features. It has Sentinel, which is a feature that it has now, allows you to write all kinds of policy around like what is allowed and what's not allowed within the Terraform. What can it do? Like, enforcing things like, all my AWS primitives resources have to have tags on them.
Oh,
like
cool.
That's a common thing that you can also do with it. So it kind of bundles up all of that functionality that you would need in order to use Terraform in like a larger organization. So
that's great. Yeah, I mean, you've seen pretty broad adoption of Terraform within the development community. So I'm sure many folks are trying to, are using it inside of large organizations, and it would make a lot of sense to centralize the management of that into an enterprise offering, like be able to sort of take control and centralize some of the workflows for approvals and things. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Well, great. So let's thanks for that overview. Let's hop into a little bit about how like why and how of on-prem for
Yeah,
HashiCorp,
absolutely.
and then we'll kind of talk about like what you're doing before that, and then I'll at some point I'll hand it over to your screen as well, so we
Sure.
can hop into some of these, the original version of Terraform Enterprise as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when as we're growing Terraform Enterprise, we made a strategic decision. It was back in sometime in 2016, mid 2016 or late, something like that. That the focus for a lot of these functionality was going to be Fortune 2000, and so as we were looking at that, an on-prem became a necessity at that point, right?
Yeah.
The Fortune 2000, in terms of just the kinds of customers, they even if they just have a like, oh, it would be nice if it ran in my data center. Some of them have like regulatory reasons where it has to run inside their data center,
Sure.
be it governmental or industry or whatever it might be. And so it became obvious that we had to have some kind of on-premises offering. So the first version of the very, very first version, I'll tell this as a shorter version of this story. The very, very first version of Terraform Enterprise was effectively just a full-blown copy of what was running in the SaaS. So that was like, 50 VMs and a whole bunch of VPCs. And it was very quickly obvious that really wasn't going to work. We sort of rolled that out for one customer early on and realized quickly, this is not going to fly. Like, it's too big a footprint. It requires too much actual work to do all the upkeep and all that kind of stuff. And they're not going to have a dedicated ops team just to keep this up and running with that many VMs. And so pretty quickly we started working on what would be the sort of the first version of the installer, which was AWS only.
Okay.
At the moment, at that time, we really had the focus was customers that were in AWS, and calling it installer is sort of nice, but really it was really just we pre-built an AMI, and they would go out and we would share it with their account, and then they can go out and say like, okay, and we would give them some Terraform in order to spin it up. But it was the simplest possible Terraform. It ran inside just one instance, and they could go off and run it and spin it up. And we had a bunch of tooling related to how to package the software, and it was all kind of whatever was being done in the SaaS, we kind of tried to glom onto it to a certain extent, but it never really worked. And so we did that. We worked on that version of the product for probably about a year.
Okay.
And we got it to that point where it was working. We had customers on it. And the next big goal that was given to the team was, okay, well, it's cool that it's AWS only, but it needs to not be.
Yeah.
And that completely makes sense. Azure is huge in the Fortune 2000 space.
Yep.
And so
is VMware.
So
right?
is so is VMware. So are all the clouds really. And so as we started to look down this road of like, okay, how do we do it? We started to effectively transliterate what we had done in AWS into another cloud. And we did that. We worked on that for, probably about a month before we realized that the management burden, just the overhead of having to maintain all of these things, and they were all going to be different enough that it wasn't like, oh, it's just slightly different for Azure, slightly different for whatever. It was going to be significant because of the amount of work that was involved. The team was very small at the time. It probably wasn't going to work. And so that's when I first basically reached out and we started talking about like, hey, maybe this would be a good place to start using replicated, because some of the things that were really attractive was that, we had on a roadmap, like, okay, we want to have VMware support, and that's 6 months away. And it's like, okay, well, if we just basically converted it all into replicated, we could effectively meet all the clouds simultaneously.
Right.
We could just say like, hey, it's available on all the clouds right now, and you can just sort of go off with it. And so we kind of paused work to basically do a spike of how would it work to use replicated. And so we I think that spike probably was only about a couple of weeks, and we had it basically
Right.
up and running, the very first version up and running. And then we're like, okay, we'd proved it pretty quickly, and then we got the approval to go forward with it, and just started plowing through. So
Yeah, I remember when that happened. It was definitely a very fast evaluation in terms of, you implemented it, you POC'd, and
mhm.
then, I mean, this is actually, like, I think it goes back to the HashiCorp ethos, which is like pragmatic, right? Like,
Yeah,
you sort of realized, hey, look, like, this is the fastest route to get all the things we want to get done. Let's just do it.
yeah. I mean, it was really going to be an uphill battle at the time for the team size and just the architecture of the thing that how it was architected in terms of, it was built with Packer, was built inside an AMI. So, like, to give it an example, there's no ability to, I don't know if there is now, but at the time there was no ability to, like, share an image between accounts in Azure. And
Mm,
so we were like, okay, what do we do? Do we just, like, give people a big VHDKX file and they just upload it to their account? Like, that was literally, we were considering that as a solution. We're like, this is terrible.
yeah,
Like, no one's going to want to do this. So yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, that was, I think, not quite 2 years ago. I think it was just like maybe the fall or winter of 2017, and yeah, and you guys evaluated really quickly. You sort of figured out that it was going to be a good path. Oh, and I see a question coming in from David on the chat, which says, which scheduler, native, kube, etc., is HashiCorp using with replicated?
Yeah. So this was sort of going to be a little bit when I could talk
Yeah,
about it now. That's fine. So when we started, that was 2 years
yeah,
ago, 2.5 years ago. And so at the moment, at then it was the main availability was the native schedule. I think you had Docker Swarm at the time as
yeah. We
well.
had Docker Swarm and we had the native scheduler
Yeah.
as the two primary that
Yeah.
we were pushing.
Yep. So we started on the native. At the time, basically for pragmatic reasons, we were looking to replicate the architecture that we had in the AMI within replicated and not really do anything significantly different. And so it made sense a lot for us to basically, like, hey, like, the native one will give us effectively an architecture that looks exactly like the AMI that we can just stamp down on individual instances. Yeah. So we went with the native one. Right now, what we're doing is we're in the midst of rebuilding it so that it will run on top of the Kubernetes scheduler, so that we can. So one of the things that, and this is sort of the normal evolution of a product, right? So it only ran in AWS, and so we needed to run other places, and then we made it run in other places, and then it was like, hey, can it run as a cluster in other places? And so we evaluated for a while about how we wanted to achieve that, and just made the decision, like, hey, let's just basically redo it on top of the replicated kube scheduler.
Yeah.
And so that is currently in testing. So we're working on the beta release of that, now-ish. And so it should be out, sometime this year. So
Yeah, I mean, we'll dive into that a little bit
yeah,
later here, and we'll actually go through it and kind of talk through that. Why don't I go ahead and have you share your screen, and let's go ahead and hop into the how you're using some of the replicated tooling
sure.
in the vendor portal. So if we go here, great. So everyone that's not familiar, this is the replicated vendor portal. This is the sort of hosted component of replicated that application vendors use to manage the releases that they're distributing, the channels that they sort of are assigning those to, customers that they have those releases being distributed to, and then things like troubleshooting and collecting of support bundles. And this is kind of the admin dashboard. We're going to go through some of the ways that the HashiCorp team uses this and how they use it across their team, because I think it's really interesting. But the first thing too, and on the left, just because we were just talking about it, I think it's interesting just to show the app. So we have here, we're in the sort of standard Terraform Enterprise, but then there's also the HA version, which is the Kubernetes distribution. So we'll just stick in the current version, which is the primary application. And one of the things that we talk about at Replicated in terms of the value that we provide is really around how do you manage sort of these build pipelines, and how do you get different, how do you have a SaaS product and have an enterprise offering? How do you tie it all together so that you're not doing manual operations to do this. And I think the HashiCorp team has done an incredible job of automating much of this. So I'd love to have Evan just talk a little bit about sort of how they get releases into replicated.
Sure. Yeah. So we'll kind of work it backwards from what the customer sees and downloads to how the sausage is made, right? So we have like, this is the release. This release is we tag our releases basically by a date and then like a minor bug fix version. And so that's this month. This came out last week. And so, and this one thing I will note that we love these sort of the stats that we get about the customers. That lets us get a lot of information about, like, after we do a release, it's been a week since it's been out or so. As I think this was released on the 14th, and so a little less than a week now, and we're seeing a quarter of our customers that have installed that. That's great for us to know. We tell support that, and we let them know, like, hey, by the way, we're seeing good uptick. When obviously it's a long tail, but it's always good to know, like, are people advancing forward? How many people are installing new software, that kind of thing. So I'll say that's something we really like.
Awesome. Yeah, and I assume that most of your licenses are set to allow your customer to manually update versus having them automatically update.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, we don't do any automatic promotion or automatic updating because the customers are the customers that we have for this product are very like, no, like, I have to schedule a time to do the updates and all that kind of stuff. But regardless of that, you can see here that we basically have 50% running something in the last 2 months, which is excellent.
Yeah, right? That's actually quite high for enterprise software. I mean, if you look at the history of enterprise software, it used to take people months or years to update. So the fact that you're getting in 2 weeks, 25% of your customers on board is pretty staggering.
Yeah, and what I will say is, replicated makes it, part of the reason that we're able to do effectively these monthly releases is because replicated makes it easy, right? Like otherwise the lift for, like, okay, we got to spin up all the machinery again to do a release would be massive, and it would be prohibitive. And now we're able to, if we could look at the release history of the stable channel. You could see that, it comes at a pretty good clip, right? So it's effectively, we have them pre-scheduled at the beginning of the year, like when we're going to be doing each release. And these minor releases are, if we have bugs and stuff like that, we basically can cherry pick them over.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then real quick, just on that, I saw in the release history, it shows the air gap status, is built and you can rebuild it. Do you guys do many air gap installs?
Yeah, a ton.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we do a lot of air gap installs. And so a significant number of our customers are, we'll call this 2019 air gap, right? 2019 air gap is basically where you're running inside AWS, but you don't install an internet gateway.
Sure.
That's a huge portion of the customers that we see that are air gapped. And we have a lot of them. We've the air gap functionality gets very well used by the product.
Yeah, and those, the only one point there is just that any air gap customers, we can't show up in the stats for version history. So, like, there's probably a bunch of other folks that are active. We just don't really know. So we're able to show you. I think there's maybe one of those actually says is an air gap. Is maybe if you look at if you go back to the release channel screen, if you hover over like customer count, you'll see one of them is probably air gap. So it's inactive. Yeah, air gap. So a lot of them are air gap enabled. So of those 400, good number of them could be active at any point.
Yeah, and we know that we kind of use this as a proxy value, right? It's a percentage, right? So we're like, okay, it's a rough calculation.
Yeah, cool. So then, great. I'll let you keep talking about sort of how the pipelines work.
Yeah. So if you come in here, you see we have unstable, which gets the same one. This gets used primarily internally. So we have a separate, you can see there's a separate internal channel which gets used only in the case of like where we know that there's some specific fix that is needed. So one thing that we do is the replicated version actually gets dog fooded internally by our ops team. So our ops team uses basically an install of this product in order to manage actually our SaaS infrastructure, so that way it's separated, because we don't want to use the SaaS to also manage the SaaS. And so they use the basically Terraform Enterprise on premises to do that bit. And as a result of that, we've had this channel mostly exists because we've had times where we have broken something and it actually has broken it for our internal customer, and we've been like, okay, well, you're sort of the most important customer here, so let's just fix it. So that's why this channel exists. But for the most part, what we do on the we use the unstable channel for is what we'll do is a week before we have the release date, we have it all pretty scheduled out. So we basically, the actual code freeze happens 3 weeks before the release. And then a week before the actual release, we cut the release onto the unstable channel. And then typically the internal, like our TFE to HashiCorp engineering, the one that's internal, will go install the unstable and basically help us out for a whole week of just like, generalized stability testing. Like, oh, we've been using it for a week. And then once we're good there, we're like, okay, we're pretty confident in it, then it will get installed on stable. So yeah, and the way that I think it might be interesting to look at how we do this. So one thing that that you can do inside Replicated, and Grant, you could talk about this, is you can promote between these channels. And just due to some sort of quirk about how we ended up doing the tooling, we actually didn't use that, but we effectively do it the same way in our CI system. So this is the CI system that is currently used to actually do the deployments. And in this particular case, this was for a particular release, and so it's already been done. But normally what you would do is after it gets uploaded and validated, there would be buttons here that say deploy. And so it's deploying the exact same asset from CI into Replicated. So even though it shows up, and we show the sequence numbers here of the actual releases, it shows up as separate sequence numbers, but we're basically okay with that because we know that it's coming from the same CI assets.
Oh,
so,
sure. Okay.
Yeah.
And are you using our API or CLI? What's actually
so this uses a combination of the CLI and the API. I can't remember why it uses one versus the other in a couple of instances. Yeah, these are written mostly as bash scripts that are run by a make to basically go and like make new the command line tool can make new releases and promote into those things. And so I'm sure that's what it uses for that. There's a couple of places I have to go check and see where it uses the API for. So
sure. And so you set this pipeline up, and so this is sort of at the very beginning when you're doing your release, sort of like iteration. And so the interesting thing, if you flip back to the replicated vendor portal, as you mentioned, generally if you go to releases, right, you can click promote on a release, and this won't actually do the promotion. But most folks would actually use this to take the same sequence number and actually promote it across multiple channels. So that's how we sort of do that. I guess like immutable release, right? So it's like an artifact. But in your case, you're saying, okay, look, we actually took care of that immutability beforehand in our CI process. So it's promoting the same artifacts. It's just creating a different release in Replicated, and then you have that across your different channels.
Yeah, and we're in the midst, as we're working on the new version of the product that runs on top of Kubernetes, we're redoing a bunch of this release process, and I suspect that we'll probably start to use actual promotions rather than generating individual releases, because part of it was just pragmatic at the time that we were like, look, we just need to get this going, and so it made sense, and we knew that it was backed by the CI system, so it didn't really matter that much.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point though. It sort of illustrates that this is really a workflow and pipelining tool from many regards, right? So in this instance, it's just part of it's connecting into other systems. So if you want to take care of the immutability in your CI system, that's fine. You can use Replicated to manage the channels and customer assignment, right? In this case, you're saying in the future you might move to actually having Replicated manage the immutability and the release of it as well. So the whole concept here is there's not one way that's the only way. We've sort of laid out what we think is a very sort of usable practice, but like, hey, if you find a way that's going to work better for your team, you can integrate with the API and the CLI and have it push. And we've seen people do lots of different things. Like some folks have had automatically created a channel per branch and then had licenses automatically generated. I think you actually said you were doing
Yeah.
something interesting for testing as well.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do that same thing. So we have this other application over here, which, I'll show you. It takes a second to load because it is very large.
Oh, interesting.
And it's very large. Actually, the releases one is not going to be as useful. We'll look at channels. So this actually, what this does is this is, you can see by the name, this is actually a channel per Git branch. And if we go over to customers over in the same application, you can see that these are actually customers also that match that Git branch. And so if I were to look at this one, for instance, you could see, yeah, it's sort of it's kind of a weird way of doing it, but so this customer is tied to that particular branch. And so the reason to do that is that we can have a license that's just, you can download this license and then you can get that exact branch and you don't have to do anything else with it. And that actually gets used inside our testing. So over here, so like, for instance, these are individual branches that are going to go off and get tested. And actually, maybe I should just pull up what the testing looks like.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So workflows, I don't know why it's showing that. It doesn't make any sense. Why are you showing me that?
Or are you running CircleCI Enterprise as well?
Yeah. So we're in the midst of moving over a bunch of the CI workflows. The Team City was used mostly by my team when it first started off, and then as time went on, there was the decision that, like, hey, let's go forward, and like the team that manages CI was like, we decided that we actually want to use Circle because it was easier for all the other, instead of it being a thing that like 12 people used, it was going to be a thing that like 400 people used. Yeah. So it made more sense. They did all the evaluation for that.
And is this CircleCI Enterprise installed through Replicated?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah, yes, it is.
It's,
yeah.
So ancestral.
The full synergy.
Amazing.
So if we go through all of these branches, all these workflows are ones that have been tested. Oh, and there will be a PR on that particular one. So like we can look at this one, for instance, and see that like this what was interesting is this obviously was failing until I was obviously having quite a bit of issue trying to get it to work. But in this particular instance, we have this set up as actual CircleCI workflow where you can basically chain two things, and these individual scenarios are actually deployed through Replicated. So this fixed scheme, if we were to go over to the vendor portal, we would find a fixed scheme customer and a fixed scheme channel. And if you go through to here, you'd see that what we actually do is we go off and do a Terraform install and then actually install the replicated release that's tied to that one, and then go through and like run some tests on it and make sure that it works. So that's how we know we have validation before a PR gets merged that like, hey, this actually works all the way through actually in replicated as well. Oh, wow. And so, it takes, however long, this took 18 minutes or so. So, but yeah, that's fine. 18 minutes is not that big a deal, right?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Quick question.
Sure.
What kinds of like flavors of tests are you running here? Is this like spinning up WebDriver, or are you just running like some unit tests? Like what is the extent of those?
Yeah, so the test right now, it's a pretty simple smoke test. You can see it's actually labeled run smoke tests. And so what this particular one does is it's not extensive. We are in the midst, we had an integration test suite that actually was using a thing called Cypress that would go off and it would click around and do different things. And that proved, it worked for a while, and then it wasn't working for us.
It's hard.
Yeah. It was just too flaky to run in CI. And so a different team, thankfully, than my team, is actually working on writing an integration test suite, and they actually have that done. We just haven't wired it in yet. So this smoke test was actually one that we wrote way back in the day that we're just sort of keep maintaining and updating. And basically what it does is it makes sure that the core workflow of the product works. So what this actually does is it sets up the admin, it creates a workspace, it uploads it, and then it makes sure that it basically plans and applies. And if we can do all that, we're like, okay, we didn't break the product.
Yeah.
right? Like we understand that there's lots of edges to that, but as long as this pipeline works, we know that, like, for instance, all the services had to come up for it to work. All the services had to function at some level for this to work. So that kind of helps us validate that, like, the actual install of this functioned.
Yeah. And
so on every developer branch, CircleCI is spinning up a brand new instance and then installing PTFE end to end on it.
Yes, it's actually spinning up. How many of these instances? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 instances simultaneously, and goes off and tests them and then destroys them.
And those are just EC2 boxes?
Yeah. So yeah, these are all, they're all, it's all set up inside a AWS account that's just for testing, so that it can be blown away. We can clear all the resources if we need to. This is actually our V5 one that will go off and set up. If we look at the Terraform for it, it goes off and it actually sets up like a much larger set of things that sets up like ASGs and primaries, and basically make sure that the whole an actual replicated created Kubernetes cluster converges, everything joins, and then we run the test against that too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So that one's for the Kubernetes based installer.
Correct. Yeah. And there's just the one right now because we're sort of in the midst of working on it, but it has fewer flavors anyway, because that's basically how we're building it. You know, you get it in a sort of a 1 or a 2. Some of this is related to like the fact that we support, like, oh, you can store data on a local disk instead of internally. Some of this is like, you know, does it work different on does it work different with external vault? Does it work different with like a proxy? So some of this is individual install scenarios that we found were problematic for us from like customers would say like, hey, this broke or that broke. So like, okay, let's add those into this actual CI workflow for them. So
cool. That's amazing. Dex, do you have any other questions on this?
No, this is super cool.
Great. Cool. So let's hop back into the vendor portal.
Sure.
So that's a really, you know, I think it's interesting to see how you're using this as a secondary app to then do all of your dev. And then obviously there's a lot of channels here.
Yeah.
With the customer that's being created.
They get cleaned up like once every 3 to 6 months or so.
Okay.
And kind of go in and delete them.
Yeah.
So
we should probably have a way to do that easier, but it's fine. And then it's interesting, you know, you're using sort of the automated license creation, signing it to the channel, and then, you know, running it through with that CI. I love that. That's a great use case. And it basically kind of shows like how you can, again, tie replicated into your different tools to then create stable releases. And, you know, most folks have access to create multiple applications. It's pretty easy to do.
Yeah.
Great. So let's go back to the main application here.
Sure.
And let's talk a little bit about license management. So,
sure.
You know, one of the other things, so beyond just pipelines and releases, we see managing customer licenses as a really, you know, big part of the value that Replicated provides. And so, you know, obviously you're creating licenses, you know, through automation on the testing side, but, you know, here on the production side, you know, I think we talked about how you use the customers panel to sort of manually provision licenses.
Yeah.
And so maybe while we're at that, we should actually just talk about how, if you click on team, one of the things that you've done, if you go to RBAC, is you have different RBAC rules set up to allow you know, the sales team or someone else.
Yeah, that's this general one. Yeah.
Yeah, to actually manage and create licenses. So, you know, role-based access control is something that we introduced, you know, fairly recently to be able to do fairly granular policy. So if you click on view policy, it's kind of like an IAM. You know, it describes the things that, you know, this user can do, and it's really useful for like a team like HashiCorp that's growing, and you want to have Replicate to be kind of a cross-functional tool, so that you have your, you know, your sales team, your support team, or anyone else be able to use this portal without worrying about them promoting a release to a channel, or, you know, doing something that it just probably shouldn't be doing. Right.
Yeah. I mean, like, you know, in this particular instance, we don't really we want to allow so when we first started doing this, and the way that it works now is that the SEs, as well as a small group of basically like account managers, have access to this to come in, create accounts, create customers, do license provisioning, that kind of thing. And then, but we didn't, originally they could come in, they could like, add team members and all that kind of stuff. We're like, yeah, we don't really need you doing that. And so this sort of restricts down the list of things that they can do. And what I will say is that we're sort of in the midst of discussing how to automate this even further, right? So like one of the things that we're talking about doing is using a SKU that's actually inside like Salesforce, and then writing the automation to be able to say like, okay, when that shows up in our actual customer database, that we go out and we generate a license and generate the customer here and upload the license to a place that the individual account manager can therefore go download it, so that they don't have to go interact with this, even because I mean, they can do it just fine. It's not really hard for them to do, but it's mostly like, how can we cut down those gaps so that they're, as we have, however many account managers we have now, we probably have 50 account managers right now. If in 2 years we have 250 account managers, that's going to stop scaling very well. And so being able to kind of give them the information where they need it. And we have it all done. I mean, we do it for CI, right? We're creating licenses. We do it. It's mostly like just doing the integration in the right place. So
and using Salesforce, probably like their SOAP API or something.
We have other people that thankfully that know how all that all works.
We have Salesforce admins. That's something we've talked about at Replicated too, which we think probably something we'll build, knowing that you guys want it as well, is an integration to Salesforce, so that these licenses can be automatically generated. Just hasn't been something that we've done yet. We thought getting cross-functional role-based access control in was an important part of this, and then I think more ways to automate license generation and maintenance is great. So let's just hop into licenses. Can we want to view one or two, maybe even let's be in your main app?
Let's look in this. Let's look in the dev app.
Great. So if we look here, customers, if you just pick in any one, one of the things that you're going to see is,
let's pick a more recent-ish one. Let's see here.
You can sort. You can see.
There we go. This is the one that was created specifically for the release that we did a couple weeks ago.
Great. And so here, if we scroll down a little bit and we just kind of show, you have a lot of channels, but there's just some of the policy you can enforce here, like expiration policy. So if you wanted to have this license expire in a year and 3 months, you can do that. You can then also decide what should happen when this license expires, right? So oftentimes you might set this to ignore if it's a big customer, but you could do actually just prevent like a restart and prevent updates from coming, or you can prevent just like stop everything and stop all the containers. So give you some options for like how you want to enforce trial, like licenses. And then if you scroll down more, we talked a bit earlier about the idea of update policy. And so, one of the ways, if you want to just ensure that your customers are always running the latest version, and maybe at the entry tier of your enterprise offering, you just do automatic updates. So, hey, you buy a basic license of Terraform Enterprise online, and you pay sort of the entry price, you're going to get updates automatically pushed to you every time we release one. And then if you want more flexibility and you want more sort of process around this, then you're going to need to pay for a higher tier and then get manual updates. We've seen some customers do that. And then finally, you kind of see this air gap concept. So you can air gap enable a license. And we talked about the idea of air gap when we talked about release channels, but ultimately what an air gap license does is it creates a .air gap package for a release channel. And then by enabling this entitlement, this license can then do an air gap install. And so the difference between a license that doesn't have this in it is that a license, an RLI file that's generated for an air gap enabled license, actually has data written into it, and the values are cryptographically signed in that file. So normally an RLI file is just basically empty, and it's just a pointer to the replicated service, and then that will download all the different entitlements. But in the case of an air gap version, we need to be able to pass that data down and validate that it's actually authentic. And then there's some features here. Like one of the things that Mark and I added a long time ago is require activation, which most teams aren't using today. But what this does allows you to actually assign an email address to this license. And then anytime someone tries to install this specific license, it'll send an email to their email address, and they'll have to take that sort of unique code that's generated and then paste it in as part of the install process. So think about it like a second factor of authentication that they actually own the license. And then, to the right, you see custom fields, and custom fields can be really useful. So if you have specific entitlements that you want to limit your application by, number of users, number of hosts.
Just making one real fast.
Yeah, you can make one. Yeah, great.
I mean, we're in the dev app, so nothing matters over here. So
yeah, so you can create a custom field, and it could be seats, and and then you how many seats? Great. And then you just decide how to name it, and then create a default, and then you can decide if this is required for every license. I don't think you should do that actually, even for your dev.
Oh yeah, okay.
Because then it'll require that every time you set it, you create a license. And then hidden would basically hide it in the admin console from the end customer. So we create this, and then now if we go back to the customers page, any customer will see this new option to add and tweak the number of seats, and then that information will be available down in custom feed. Yeah, that'll be available both as an environment variable. We can write it in, as part of the configuration, but then also if this changes, we'll update it down, and you can just be pinging this little API that we run for license information. So you can change this at any time, and your application can update. And it's a really nice way to get that information down to your application when it's running privately.
One other thing that we use on here that it might be interesting to point out is the actual audit log for the installs. So this obviously we've been mucking around inside here, but you can actually see it, especially as we allow account managers to go in and create licenses right now. This will actually show us who created this license on what time and when did whatever happened. Right. In this particular case, you can see this is actually the CI service going off and creating the license and downloading it and doing a bunch of muckety muck with it. But you can see also that I was coming in here and I was potentially making a mess, hopefully not. And we've used that in the past to figure out okay, who was doing this and what happened there. And yeah, so that we've definitely used that before.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And this audit log is also all of our audit logs available as everyone's kind of clicking from an API. So if you want to create an API token, you can do that, and it probably shouldn't click as it might show anyway.
Yeah.
But if you do, you can create an API token and then pull it into a centralized SIM, so you have all this data centrally located.
Yeah.
And let's click on the reporting tab. Sure. It sounds like you installed this, so it should show. Generally, what happens here is if a license has been installed and it was online and it made an outbound request, it would show up as installed. Maybe
I'm not sure why it didn't. It should have actually. So this one at least it says active. So this probably has the reporting.
So this will say, here's when it was installed. Here's what happened.
Yeah, that's today. So
yeah, that's been done a few times.
Yeah,
today.
So it shows up like this actually because of the way that it gets installed in CI. So these timestamps are really close together because they're being that same license is being installed however many that was, nice. 5-7 times simultaneously by CI. So,
and then each one of these instances actually has, if you click into the details, it'll actually show you the specific details of when they updated different versions. So if this had been updated from one version to the next, you would see the list here of different versions that it's currently running.
Yeah, this was a fresh install. So
cool. Okay, so that takes us through customers. Let's talk just quickly about troubleshoot. I know that you're not really using the custom analyzers yet, but support bundles here. Looks like you have a couple that you've uploaded. Mm-hmm. You're definitely doing you are customizing your support bundle, right?
Yes, we are.
And so what we find is that for our customers, remotely troubleshooting a customer environment can be a little bit difficult. And so having a way to collect a bunch of information that's consistent from every environment in a very simple way It's been really helpful. How do you guys use the support bundle today?
Yeah, so the way we use them is we have the customers go in, and so they're available to download both just in the actual replicated dashboard as well as on the command line. So
Right.
we'll have them go in and download that, and then we have a service, a file upload service that's attached through our actual Zendesk account that support uses, and so they upload those actual support bundles attached to the ticket when they're asking about stuff. So that way, the flow is all right there for support. And then then we download them. And what we've been doing is we have some internal tooling that's just some easy tooling, but a lot of times what we've done is that the data itself is laid out pretty easily anyway. And so we have just sort of sessions as new support people come on about like, hey, here's the data, here's how it's organized, here's what you're going to be looking for. So I say it's probably more a testament to just the amount of data and the organization there that we haven't had to write a lot of tools, because mostly like it's a tar file. I'm going to go in and I'm going to open it up, and then I can go in and look at, like the logs for this container are basically where you'd expect them to be. So we haven't had to add a lot on top of it. We do have support that knows like, here's common, like you're telling me that this didn't connect. And so I'm going to go through and I'm just going to grab through the logs and see like, oh, yep, here's what you're seeing. So that's those sort of the common. We've talked about automating that to a certain extent, which is sort of what the analyzers do.
Exactly what they do. Yeah, exactly.
And so we haven't done any of that yet. So probably we should start thinking about using the analyzers for that. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a very new feature. So let's go ahead and click on a support bundle if you don't mind.
Sure.
Just click on any of them. And, what this will show first is just running those analyzers. And so you can actually write custom analyzers. We didn't enable that in your account. If we enable custom analyzers for your account, you can create custom analyzers, which will then do that exact same thing. It'll grep through, find some issue, and then highlight it as a tile. And so you can sort of present, so your engineering team or maybe an advanced support person can write these analyzers, and then they'll show up here. And that way, your tier 1 team can actually just run through it and have a list of analyzers that are executed every time that you're actually that you're managing the application. So if some customer has an issue, they generate a support bundle, they send it to you, and then you see this other option too, which is share with replicated. So if you need to escalate something up to us as tier 2 support, this is just an option. This will put it into our account. Then we can help you, but it's totally up to you. You don't have to share it with us at any point. And then to kind of highlight the idea of, we'll go to the file expector. Yeah. So this is sort of how these support bundles are laid out. This little table here, as you click through it, so you can see like, if we go into the app and the containers, we click on one of these, and then we click just any line. So if we click so if we click, that should happen. Maybe if we click on the line number. Yeah, if you click on the line number, then this URL actually becomes deep linkable. So this can just be useful in terms of an artifact for a conversation when you're in, that Zendesk ticket, when you're in Slack, being able to, instead of saying like, hey, go navigate your way here, just send this link, and then anyone that has access to this support bundle can view it. So obviously, supportability of disconnected services is really important. So you'll see Replicated adding more and more to this all the time. And we're really excited about some of the things that are coming out here, but glad it's been useful to date. And it sounds like you've just been using it to customize what you collect from your manifest, and then describing what should go into the support bundle. But with the new iterations, trying to make that easier and try to speed up the remediation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's for us, what we do is we have just some application specific stuff that we wanted to include in there. So it's like, for our specific application, it's like, how many runs have you been doing? How, like, when's the last run that ran successfully? That, like, those sorts of information, so that when we're looking in the bundle, we can do it mostly for time correlation. Is what we use it a lot for, to basically say like, the customer can say like, it didn't work. And instead of, we can sort of use that information to go back and say like, well, it worked on Tuesday and it didn't work on Wednesday. So now we at least have a time frame that we can use within the support bundle to sort of narrow down the search field. So
that makes sense. That's cool. Great. So that's supportability. And then just curious, do you guys use, so on the images tab, do you use our internal registry, or do you use a third-party private registry?
We use a third-party one. So we're using Key, and some of these are in here. Actually, these are old ones from when we were first testing it.
So push the registry,
yeah.
So you have an integrated third-party private registry.
Yeah, and the reason for that is that one of the things that happened as we started to go down the route of getting things working inside Replicated was that we had to go through and basically start building regular Docker images for everything, and which at the time was not the case for a bunch of SaaS services, or we had this sort of smaller set of SaaS services. And so what ended up happening is the course of going through and doing this exercise was that the replicated bits basically were the impetus for the SaaS to move in that direction as well. So that was,
cool.
I suspect in many companies it's probably the other way around, where the SaaS already was building Docker images for everything, but that wasn't the case for us. We had to start building them all for all of our stuff. And then as we already had them all built, the teams that were basically managing the SaaS was like, well, they're already building all the Docker images. Why are we doing, like, they've already done all this work. Let's just reuse it. So
that's cool.
It kind of ended up where like all of the software, both on-prem as well as the SaaS, is inside the same account Snyk. So yeah,
awesome. Yeah, I mean that's exactly why we have third-party registry integration, because we don't want you to have to build separately and push different places. And so, and you call it key, I call it quay. But you know, I think you're right.
I asked an East Coast like Liz on the Water person.
Yeah,
if you're an East Coast Liz on the Water, no, you're not.
No.
Yeah, because I was like, you know, how do I say this? So, yeah. I've said it both ways many times. So,
great. Okay, so this is a really amazing overview of like how you use the replicated vendor portal and how you get value from it. Now let's just go into a quick install of you know, one of the products. And so to talk about the end customer experience.
Yeah. So we'll just do a quick install of the current version, the current stable version of the product. So I'm actually going to use Vagrant to just bring up an actual AWS instance.
Oh, I know Vagrant.
Yeah. It's another HashiCorp product if you haven't seen it before. Oh.
It was the first HashiCorp product too?
It was.
Yeah.
It was Mitchell, one of the co-founders, started working on it when he worked at the company prior to HashiCorp.
Oh, cool.
And so they needed a way of spinning up basically dev instances and test for developers. And so it started. It's all written in Ruby because that's what Mitchell was writing at the time. So yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, so this is just going to bring up an instance. In this particular case, it's pre-configured with the information that I expect it to be using. This is not ready. This should not. Oh, cool. This is the demo gods. So. I don't think I've ever seen that error. No, I don't want down. I want, what do I want? Stop? No. Don't I want?
Stopped. I think you went stop.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Is it halt?
Halt? That was weird. All right. If this comes up, this demo doesn't take very long. So now I'm remembering.
There you go.
Yeah, so this is just, we have a bunch of AWS accounts that are set up just for testing with delegated billing and all that kind of stuff. So that way they can be tracked, and the general mess of AWS resource management and tracking. So
cool.
All right. So now let's go take a look. Yep. So this is just, you can see this is a 1604 machine. It's super vanilla. I don't even remember how much memory. 8 gigs of memory, probably 4 cores, if I'm not mistaken. 2. So
nice.
yeah. So yeah. So what we ended up doing was we proxy the actual replicated install script, and one of the reasons we do that is just to give it kind of a vanity URL for our customers, but as well as it lets us inject some common options that we have found that are like important for our customers. Most of them are related around like how to handle Red Hat and then things like that. But it just kind of makes it a slightly it makes the docs easier.
Yeah, we actually always tell folks, to proxy if they can. Yeah, I think it just creates a better experience for the customer as well. So
yeah,
great. So we're asking here for the default address, if there's a proxy that this host needs to reach the internet, and now it's just going to install, Docker and replicated and kind of get the base service up and running. In the Kubernetes world, we actually install a bit more. So we install like Weave, and we install Rook and Ceph and Contour and raw Kubernetes, and then the replicated containers, and then start to get ready to get the app ready. That takes a little bit while longer. So that's the other advantage of just the native demo is like it's basically the same UI and the same experience. It's just that it spins up about 3 minutes faster. It takes we are though I always pride ourselves in saying that the replicated Kubernetes is basically the second fastest. So GKE is the fastest because they already have master. Then I think EKS takes like 15 minutes, and like AKS takes like 10 minutes. So we're like 5. So it's not too bad. Very vanilla installer based on kubeadm. I think we actually maybe today we open sourced the actual like installer repo.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I know that we've looked into it over time, so that's great. Yeah, so we've done all the bits here, so the rest of this demo is actually not even in the shell. So once we've done all this work, we can just jump over and do the rest of it in the actual browser.
Great. So
if it will let me click. There we go. So in this particular case, I actually have it set up. I already have it set up with a host name and all that kind of stuff, just to make this slightly easier on myself.
Great. So
actually, let's go to the non HTTPS one for a moment, just so that people can see what that looks like.
I bet Chrome redirects you now, though. Oh, there it is. Didn't. Okay, great. Yeah. So we always allow the end customer to actually, give them a little warning. We detect the browser, say, hey, we use a TLS cert that we self-signed in order to bootstrap this machine. So when you click continue to set up, this is generally when you can provide your own TLS certs and keys. So it's going to give you a warning. So the warning that we kind of preview you with. So now let's say, hey, it's not private. You go to advanced and then proceed. And so now this is if you have, do you have certs already created too?
No.
Okay. So you just use the
we're just going to use self-sign.
Great. Yeah. And you can see that the experience here is actually fully, you guys are using the custom CSS.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we went through and redid the CSS. You did custom CSS for our stable channel as well as the rest of the channels. So, and that was actually a conscious effort because we wanted people when they were installing internally, or if like an SC was out there, if they accidentally installed a license or installed something that wasn't on the stable channel, it would be super obvious. So it's not strictly inverted, but it's basically dark mode version of this. So that one is like white on black, and this one is black on white. So it's super easy for them to see that and understand and see that. So let's go over to documents, and we'll do the Phoenix Bank Trust.
Nice. That's your bank?
That's my bank.
Yeah, I like it. Great. Oh, and you have so one of the options here is to actually assign a license to multiple channels. So when you do that, the customer gets this experience of like, hey, pick which channel you want to install from. So if you want to give your customers the flexibility to say like, oh, I want to install this one maybe on 2 different servers, one that's going to be kind of an edge, beta release, and then one that's going to be a stable release, they can do that. Or in this case, probably just for testing, you have the option to do it every time.
And that's actually what I use this specific one for, right? So I've got this all pre-set up because in that week period where we have the release on unstable but not unstable yet, I will boot this one up and I will click, oh yeah, install unstable, so that I can click through and I can check something if I need to.
Great. So this is, I believe, probably sending the license up to the replicated server and then validating that the license is authentic and then allowing the user to proceed. So here we are setting just a password for the admin console, just a good way to secure it. Pre-flight checks. Do you guys have any custom pre-flight checks?
Yeah, we do. So you could see like this one right here is, I think there's another one in here too that's related to size. This is probably the one that's most obvious. So right now the machine needs to be able to talk to release.hashicorp.com to actually download Terraform providers.
Oh, okay,
and
sure.
So we need to surface that as soon as possible. So we added this pre-flight check so that if you're in here and that doesn't work, you immediately know like, hey, you need to fix that before you go on, because even if you happen to get get it all installed, the product won't actually function until you finish that step. So
yeah, that's great. I love that. Yeah, you've got a handful of custom ones. Hey, just real quick, a question just came in from Brian. It says, if a customer wants to install and run an application distributed with replicated on a closed instance with no online access, is there a supported workflow? And the answer is yes. We call that air gap install. And generally a license would need to be like sort of entitled with the air gap option. And when it is, then they're actually given a screen just kind of similar to that screen you saw for select the channel. You select if you want to do an online install, or you select if you want to do an air gap install. We actually, if you're to get that install, you don't run the install script, because we can't reach the internet. So you don't run the curl. You don't run curl. You just are delivered a .air gap package that includes the things you require. In the case of Kubernetes, it bundles everything up together. So it gives the customer these somewhat beefy .air gap packages that they can download, and then they can run those installs. So sounds like you have a bunch of air gap installs.
Yeah, and what we generally do is just tell customers like, you download those, and they will upload them into their own S3 equivalent or whatever they need to do in order to manage it. And then there's a couple of options. You have to download it onto the machine before they get started. So, and they manage all that because that's how they want to do it. But yeah, it works fine.
Do you use the replicated provided download links for your customers? Do you send those to them, or do you send them a separate?
No, yeah. So they go in right now. They go in, and the TAM basically goes in and get air gap password, and gets that password, and then gets the URL and sends that to them. So
they do.
Account manager manages it inside there.
So let's actually click in the better portal just to show that really quick. Just within a customer for your TFE dev. This is really interesting. So if you click a customer,
oh no, not that one. We'll just do the same customer.
So if you click this, and then you go down to that air gap enabled link, then you'll see that there's this idea of download air gap bundle. So if you click, maybe you probably have to click.
I'll
copy link address. So this link address, if you go to this, it's probably going to ask for a password.
Yeah.
Right.
Should.
Yep. And so the password might have changed. So create air gap password. So this will tell you what the password is.
Yep.
Great. So you copy that, and you might need to refresh that page. But who knows? I don't really know how the internet works.
Okay.
So you can just send your customer this URL that we provide. You can actually, I think you can customize the CSS in this if you like, and then you give them the password, and then this gives them the ability to come here, log in, click log in. Great. Oh, no build's ready for download. So
we're not building air gaps of these. That's right.
Yeah. So if there was an air gap build, then it would actually provide a link that when they click, it actually generates a one-time use link from AWS. So this is sort of the overall workflow here. You can customize this. Yeah. Great. Let's go back to the installer.
Cool.
Great.
So we're good to go here. Everything is green. I mean, I know the ability to check things like disk space and memory and CPU cores expected, all that kind of stuff is super important. We don't want customers coming here and being like, hey, I want to install this on a T2 Nano. Or like, it's just not going to fly.
Not today.
Yeah.
Raspberry Pi, as we've had people try to do. And we're like,
oh goodness, I
gee,
can imagine.
yeah, no Raspberry Pis.
Yeah, so this is the settings page. What we ended up doing was structuring it as sort of what we call choose your own adventure. So it basically structures out the individual install questions in a tree form. So it's like, are you doing this demo or production? In this case, we're going to do demo, but I'll click production so you can see. And then it would be like, how did you want to do this production? Did you want to do external services or mount a disk? And if you did external services, you could put in information about your own Postgres as well as which object store you wanted to be using.
Oh, cool.
And then if you were doing mounted disk, then you say like, where on the file system is that disk mounted?
Yeah.
In this case, we're just going to do a demo, so it doesn't ask you any questions. It's just like, okay, cool.
Kind of puts it all in one. So the production version sort of allows you to pull this out and sort of select different choices around how do you want to operationalize this and what managed services do you want to leverage. And then the sort of demo version just puts it all in one, so you can get it up and running really.
Yeah, it runs this everything, puts all the data in Docker volumes.
Yeah,
so
great.
And then we have some options around like if you wanted to change the TLS, and then some more specific options around the application, like how much memory did you want to give to plans and applies, how many concurrent ones did you actually want to go off and be running.
And what are those validators? I said we have this concept of test procedures, which will basically take the input and make sure that it's valid data. Great. So these can be regex, which these probably are.
I think so, yeah.
And then the other option is if you want to do something like test a connection string to Postgres like that above, you could actually have it spin up a container and try to execute like a little program. So these are totally programmable if you want, but turns out regex gets you pretty far a lot of times as well.
It really does.
Yeah.
So then just some more general things. This is more setup. For the demo, we don't really need any of this stuff. So we'll just go ahead and click save.
Oh, look at that beautiful purple.
Yeah.
This actually, the CSS is fairly consistent with your overall brand, which is great.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, it's very nice.
I did this 2 years ago. I used the color inspector on our website to figure out what they were, because I was like, I don't really want to go hunt through the CSS to find what exactly that shade of purple is. So I'll just use color inspector to find out. So
that's great. Perfect.
That's the engineer designer in me. So.
Yeah. Hey, you did it. It's great. And so this is starting up, and it's going to show these little charts around CPU and memory. These aren't that useful, but like everyone loves little charts like this.
I will say they are probably they're not useful until they are. Right. So like most of the time they're sort of just there and they're like, okay, cool. Like, I don't know why I would need this, except that when you do go in there and you see that your memory is at 90% and you're like, oh,
that's an issue.
Oh, I don't know what's going on. I gotta go find that out. Or if your CPU is totally pegged for a consistent amount of time, you're like, oh, something is actually wrong. So, yeah.
And you can monitor this server, separately and tie it into Nagios or something else.
Right? Oh yeah.
So hopefully you're doing that up to production.
Yeah. And we actually tell customers that as well. Like, you can put whatever you want. I mean, that's the beauty of just installing it on just any kind of server. Right. We tell them like, yeah, go install all of your own monitoring tools. Okay, you want to add this thing to Datadog, which is pretty common for our customers. Yeah, go ahead, go off and do that. So
that's great.
Yeah. So we're done. Actually, I need to fix this link color. It's a little too blue. But so in this particular case, what we end up doing is you can see in the URL down here, it's going to give us a link actually into the installed application as it's running. And in this case, we actually input a token on there. That's actually because we need to bootstrap the application now as well. And so the reason we do that is so that we don't have that customers don't get installations just hanging out on the internet, like sort of in your sort of Linksys router configuration where you can just find it and go to it and configure it. So you have to click on this link or you have to have this token. There's actually some configuration earlier on where you can make this token available over a special API that you can go hit and grab that token so that you can actually go do the setup over an actual API if you want to do a totally API driven setup. So
cool.
So we'll click that. And now you can so now we're actually inside the application. So now replicated is in the background. We're actually totally inside Terraform Enterprise at this point. So I'll just set this up.
Now you're creating easier because you had that token. That's actually a really interesting way to solve that problem. Some of our customers, what they do is they collect sort of that like initial bootstrapped user information
Yeah.
in the replicated settings screen.
Yeah. So I will say that was suggested.
Yeah.
And I kind of shot it down for, I can't type. I'm just going to type blah.
Yeah.
The reason, blah, blah.
Password complexity. I love it.
There we go. So yeah, so now we're good.
Cool.
Now we go off and use the application, right? So the reason that I did not want us collecting that information is because that is very sensitive information to a customer, and it gets saved as just part of the actual settings.
Oh, right.
Right. And so we actually, they have to save things like their Postgres passwords, stuff like that, because that's related to the settings of the application. We didn't really want to have them be saving a setting that was related to the actual configuration of this, because they can also go in and change that password later on.
Yeah.
And if there is that password saved in the settings, I can't go update that.
Right.
And so it'd just be extra confusing. So instead we just said, okay, we'll just give you a level of abstraction with this token, this setup token. What I will say is we've used that token now to create the admin user. That token is now invalid. So it's only valid for the first time until you create one user. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. It's a more secure setup. I guess as the creators of Vault, you guys are fairly
we've thought about this a little bit. Yeah.
Probably needs to do a Vault integration. It'll be fine. Cool. Okay, so let's go back to the admin console real quick.
Sure.
Just kind of click around a few things. We already went to the settings screen. Once again, there's another audit log. Replicated loves audit logs. So this is an audit log of the activity that's happening in the admin console. There's actually an API. It's also exposed. So if you want to send API events or any kind of activity into this audit log, you can. You can also actually do a totally separate audit log and then embed it into your application. So we can power your app, enterprise audit log within your application. You guys probably have your own audit log, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's nascent, but it exists.
You could replace it with
we've been discussing it. So yeah,
it's totally up for it. And then click on support. This is where you can download that support bundle. This screen, you can also put in some little markdown if you want, but that's not a big deal. The support bundle is how your customer can generate that from the UI. As Evan mentioned, you can also run that from the CLI. And this is just going to go off to all those different hosts and containers and pull that information and generate it, and then allow your customer to this does do global redaction. So if you want to redact secrets and other things out of it, you can. But your customer can also run it through DLP tool or manually inspect it and take things out before they distribute it to you. Just go ahead and click X. We don't need to have it download all the way. And then we'll show the cluster, which is just the way to see, how the application is running. You can add nodes in if you want to run it on, more than one host. And, that's a quick overview of the on-prem side. We've kind of, I think most folks have seen this. Well, I used to have a lot of services that are running.
More every day.
I like it. Great. And then if you go back to the main dashboard, we'll just click on the check for updates button. There's no updates available right now, but if Evan promoted a release to this channel, there would be an update available. He could read the release notes and he could click apply and it would apply the update. So great. Anything you want to say about this, or should we pause to see if there's any questions that are coming in?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. That is generally the stuff that we wanted to demo. So 1 hour and 20. Hope, some folks stuck around with us. We definitely appreciate it. If there's any additional questions, I know we've already answered a couple, but Evan and I will be here for a few more minutes. Feel free to raise your hand or ask somehow. I don't know what the right methodology for asking questions is.
Q&A bit thing. Yeah.
Enter the Q&A. Whatever else we can do to be helpful, we're here for you. So, Dex, did that spur any questions for you?
No, it all makes sense. I love the config screen y'all have. The choose your own adventure is a great way to think about it.
Yeah, we were, as we were initially working on it, there was a concern about the number of configurations that the system could get into. So we didn't really want, and there's configurations that don't make any sense either, right? So we didn't really want somebody being like, well, I want to use mounted disk for Postgres, but S3 to store all of my actual external data. It'd be like,
You're inconsistent.
That dog doesn't hunt.
Yeah.
So we wanted to basically say if you're going to go down these certain paths, then you have to make all of the decisions related to sort of that particular shape. We have some customers who are like, well, I kind of do this weird thing. And we're like, because it doesn't make any sense. We would just push back on them. But for the most part, it's been very successful. It means that support has just fewer configurations they have to know. Like if someone is using sort of Postgres, they know, okay, you're also using an object store. They don't have to worry like, oh, maybe your local disk filled up.
Yeah.
Right? That's an example of things that people do. So
local disks fill up a lot.
They do.
Yeah,
they do. They never seem to be big enough.
Yeah,
so
that's true. Great. I'll pause for one more minute for questions. But this has been super interesting. I learned a lot about, sort of how you're doing testing, how you're using the full sort of suite of tools for licensing and release channels. Obviously, like I said, we've learned a lot just from working with you as a customer.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. It's been great. I mean, we've, when we were first talking about doing, just over the course of, when we're working on the native product as well as in Kubernetes, it's a very close relationship of asking questions and finding out, like how should we do this? And, you all have been great about saying like, actually, we should probably do that for you. Let's just figure out how we can do that internally. And that's helped us deliver things, to be perfectly frank, way before we were expected to deliver them. Because we're like, okay, we're going to have to go figure out this whole big thing. And instead, you all went off and did that for us. So,
yeah, I mean, we think about it as oftentimes your requests, or, the same is true for many of our customers, are so useful. Mark and I always joke that in our last company, we had started a separate company together like 8 years ago. And our customers were like customer support people. And so, like that, they did like, consumer customer support and manage those teams. So many of their requests weren't great. We would have like, they weren't like product technologists. And so we would always be like, oh, these are the worst requests. And then we started building Replicated. And literally every request that we get from people, we're like, we should have thought of that. That's really good. Right? That's been the case. That's why oftentimes you're like, we're going to do this. We're like, oh, we should have thought of that.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do it instead. And so,
I mean, that's great. And we get that actually sort of within Terraform Enterprise as well from our customers, because again, it's sort of like your customer base, right? You're like, we have a very very savvy customer base. And so like their question would be like, ooh, that's a good one. So,
yeah. Like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's genius. Right?
Yeah. Like, gold.
Yeah. And so, but that's, the reason just helps the product continue to improve. We get lots of really smart customers asking for great features and pushing us in different directions. Like a lot of the stuff we're doing Kubernetes now was based on things that we saw with large banks wanting to run replicated. And, so one of the things that's coming out pretty soon is how we're going to integrate with version control systems.
Cool.
Sort of instead of, every update being applied directly, you'll actually be able to offload it and create an automated pull request into a version control system. So that way you can sort of do more of a GitOps pipeline instead of having all these, sort of independent applications. But that was based on feedback we got from customers, and feedback we got from end customers as well. So
awesome. Yeah.
Lots more coming out in the future. So obviously we've been working with you guys for a while. Hopefully we can continue to get you to adopt new things and try new stuff out, and
100%. So yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Hey, we will conclude the Replicated and HashiCorp Terraform webinar, the first Replicated webinar that's ever been done. So thank you so much for attending. And Evan, thank you so much for
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks again, folks. Have a great one.